December 8, 1980, New York City. Mark David Chapman fires 5 shots outside the Dakota apartment building. John Lennon is dead at 40 years old. But what if Chapman had missed? What if John had walked through those doors and lived another 30, maybe 40 years? The music, the politics, the world you lived through, all of it changes. Let me tell you how. Welcome back to What If Remix. Today we're talking about John Lennon, and I know some of you remember exactly where you were when you heard the news. December 8th, 1980. It wasn't just that a Beatle died, it felt like hope died. Like the 60s finally, truly ended. John was 40 years old, he'd just released Double Fantasy after 5 years of silence, and he was talking about touring again, making more music, reconnecting with Paul. And then he was gone. But what if he'd lived? What if he'd made it to 60, to 70, to 84 years old like he'd be today? Everything, and I mean everything, would be different. Let's start with the question that breaks every fan's heart. Would the Beatles have reunited? Here's what people forget. By 1980, John and Paul were finally talking again. The bitterness from the breakup 10 years earlier was fading. They'd had dinner together earlier that year. Paul had visited John at the Dakota. They were joking around, reminiscing, and John was saying things like, "Yeah, maybe someday." In 1994, the 3 surviving Beatles, Paul, George, and Ringo, recorded Free as a Bird using an old John Lennon demo. It was beautiful and heartbreaking because John was only there as a ghost on tape. But imagine this. It's 1985. John Lennon is 45 years old. Live Aid is happening, the biggest charity concert in history. Bob Geldof has been begging the Beatles to reunite for it. Without John's death hanging over everything, without that sacred, untouchable legacy, maybe they say yes. Picture it. July 13th, 1985, Wembley Stadium. Paul, John, George, and Ringo walk out together for the first time in 15 years. They play Hey Jude, Let It Be, maybe Imagine, 2 billion people watching worldwide. It would have been the biggest moment in rock and roll history. And here's the thing. If they did it once, they'd do it again. Not a full reunion, not a tour, but occasional appearances. An album in the 90s. A performance at Paul's wedding or George's memorial service when he died in 2001. The Beatles wouldn't just be a memory, they'd be a living, evolving reality well into the 21st century. But here's the controversial take. Maybe it would have been terrible. Maybe seeing them as old men, with John's voice worn down from years of smoking, with the chemistry gone, would have destroyed the mythology. Maybe the Beatles are only perfect because they ended when they did, and John died young. Double Fantasy came out in November 1980, 3 weeks before John died. It was his comeback after 5 years as a house husband, raising his son Sean. Critics were mixed on it. Some said it was brilliant, others said John had lost his edge. But here's what matters. John was just getting started again. He'd recorded enough material for a second album, Milk and Honey, which came out after his death. He was talking about touring in 1981. He was energized, excited, ready to create again. If John lives, what does the music of the 1980s sound like? While Madonna and Prince are inventing 80s pop, while synths and drum machines are taking over, what does John Lennon do? I think he would have hated most of 80s music initially. The shallowness, the commercialism, MTV reducing music to haircuts and fashion, that would have driven him crazy. But John was also a chameleon. He adapted. He worked with Phil Spector, with Elton John, with David Bowie. He wasn't stuck in the past. By 1985 or 86, I think John releases an album that somehow bridges his classic sound with modern production. Maybe he collaborates with younger artists, maybe U2, maybe REM. He becomes what David Bowie was, an elder statesman who never stops evolving. And here's what breaks my heart. The technology for home recording was just emerging in the 80s. John loved experimenting in the studio. Can you imagine him with digital recording, with sampling, with all the tools that came in the 90s and 2000s? He would have been all over it. By 2000, John Lennon is 60 years old and releasing music that sounds nothing like the Beatles, nothing like his 70s solo work, and it's either genius or divisive or both. But it exists. We get to hear it. That's what we lost. Now let's talk about Yoko, because people have strong feelings about her, and they always have. When John died, Yoko became the keeper of his legacy. For 44 years now, she's controlled his image, his music, his message. She's 92 years old now and still fiercely protective of John's memory. Some people respect her for it. Others think she's exploited him. But what if John had lived? What would have happened to their marriage? Here's the uncomfortable truth. They'd already separated once, in 1973 to 74, during John's Lost Weekend in Los Angeles. John had affairs. Yoko had affairs. Their relationship was passionate but volatile. In 1980, they were in a good place, hence Double Fantasy, an album about their love and their life together. But would it have lasted? John would be 84 now. Would they still be together, or would there have been another separation, maybe even divorce? I think they would have stayed together, but it would have been complicated. John was restless, always searching, never satisfied. Yoko was strong enough to handle him, but also demanding in her own right. They needed each other, but they also drove each other crazy. And here's something people don't think about. If John lives, Yoko probably has a bigger artistic career. She was always an avant-garde artist, but she's been overshadowed by being John Lennon's widow. If he's alive, supporting her work, collaborating with her, maybe she gets the recognition she always wanted on her own terms. Or maybe she resents that, even alive, John overshadows everything she does. Maybe that's what eventually drives them apart. John Lennon was always political. Give peace a chance. Imagine. Happy Xmas. War is over. He used his platform, and it made him enemies. The Nixon administration literally tried to deport him in the early 70s. But by 1980, John had pulled back from politics. He'd spent 5 years being a dad, baking bread, raising Sean. He'd mellowed. If he lives, does he stay apolitical, or does he re-engage? Because think about what happens in the 80s and beyond. Reagan and Thatcherism, the AIDS crisis, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Gulf War, 9/11, Iraq, the financial crisis, Trump, Brexit, climate change. I think John would have spoken out, maybe not constantly, but when it mattered. Imagine John Lennon at 61 on September 12, 2001, being asked what he thinks. Imagine him at 68, watching the banks collapse in 2008. Imagine him at 76, watching Trump get elected. He would have said something. And millions of people would have listened because John Lennon's voice still mattered. His generation, your generation, would have had one of its spokesmen alive to articulate what you were feeling. But here's the flip side. Would anyone have cared? By the 2000s, would John Lennon just be another aging rock star whose opinions don't matter to young people? Would he have embarrassed himself, saying tone-deaf things, becoming irrelevant? Think about Bono from U2. He's political, he's activist, and a lot of people find him annoying and preachy. Would John have become that? Or would he have had the wisdom and the edge to stay relevant? I think John would have evolved. He was too smart, too self-aware to become a caricature. But it would have been a struggle. Here's something wild to think about. John Lennon died and became frozen in time at 40, forever young, forever cool, forever tragic. His image is on t-shirts, posters, coffee mugs. He's a symbol more than a person. But what if he'd lived to be an old man? By 2000, John Lennon would be 60, doing VH1 Behind the Music specials, maybe releasing an autobiography, doing interviews where he reflects on the Beatles with the perspective of age. By 2010, he's 70, getting a Kennedy Center honor, being called Sir John if he'd accepted British honors. watching his son Sean's music career with pride. And now he'd be 84. Maybe he's retired, living quietly somewhere. Maybe he's still making music in his home studio. Maybe he's on social media, tweeting cryptic messages and pissing people off. Maybe he's beloved as an elder statesman, or maybe he's dismissed as an out-of-touch relic. Here's what I think. John would have made mistakes. He would have said things that aged poorly. He might have made bad albums or had embarrassing moments. The perfect mythology of John Lennon would have been replaced by the complicated reality of John Lennon, the old man. And you know what? That would have been better. Not for the legend, but for him. He deserved to get old. He deserved to see his sons grow up, Julian from his first marriage and Sean from his marriage to Yoko. He deserved to be a grandfather. He deserved to keep creating and learning and changing. The tragedy isn't that we lost the perfect icon. The tragedy is that we lost the imperfect human being who had so much more to say and do. Let's end with this. On December 8, 1980, Mark David Chapman fired 5 shots. 4 hit John Lennon, 1 missed. What if they all missed? What if Chapman's aim was off, or hotel security tackled him before he could fire, or John had decided to use a different entrance that night? Chapman would have been arrested for attempted murder instead of murder. He'd still be in prison. In fact, he's still in prison now. But John would have lived. And the question is, would it have changed John, knowing someone tried to kill him? I think it would have terrified him. Maybe he becomes even more reclusive. Maybe he leaves New York, moves somewhere quieter. Or maybe it makes him more defiant, more determined to live publicly, to not let fear win. Either way, he's alive. And the world is different. The music is different. The culture is different. Your memories are different. What if John Lennon lived? The honest answer is, we'd have more music, more moments, more memories. The Beatles might have reunited, even if just for one glorious night. John would have weighed in on the world's problems, for better or worse. He would have gotten old, made mistakes, and kept surprising us. But most importantly, a wife wouldn't have been widowed at 47. A son wouldn't have lost his father at 5 years old. And the world wouldn't have lost one of its most creative, complicated, brilliant voices at 40. John Lennon would be 84 today. Somewhere in an alternate universe he is. And I hope he's happy, still making music, still dreaming of a better world. Because that's what John did. He made us imagine. And he still does.